let's get into our main topic for this week here on Mastering Dungeons, and that is Chapter 6 of the Dungeon Master's Guide Between Adventures, specifically focusing this week on downtime. Because we love ourselves some downtime here at Mastering Dungeons.
Yes, we do.
We love our dungeons and we love to master them, but we also love mastering downtime.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to spend a full part of the episode here focusing specifically on that. So before we talked about DM advice for between adventures, like transitions and foreshadowing, plot seeds, taking session notes. But the downtime is where our heart is, because 5e introduced this downtime system right in the player's handbook, and then it expanded in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and then went on to be refined in Xanathar's, and then expanded upon by a couple of up-and-coming young writers in the Acquisitions Incorporated book to flesh out some franchise rules. So we've seen an evolution in Wizards products of downtime and what it can be used for. And in fact, in that Acquisitions Incorporated book, we call downtime the fourth pillar of D&D, because it has the ability to capture the imagination and the creativity of both game masters and players in a way that a full pillar of the game can. And so we're going to now talk about what the DMG says about it, and then maybe expand on it a bit to show how it evolved after the Dungeon Master's Guide was created.
Awesome.
I'm going to let you step in there, Teos.
Well, I want to say two things about it before we go into the details of what the DMG says, just from that kind of larger picture. One interesting thing about downtime is that it is not in the SRD. So we don't see a lot of third-party products deal with it. And it's arguable to what extent you can use downtime if you're not making an official product. But even in official products, we don't see a lot of them take downtime into consideration, which is really a shame. Downtime in a lot of ways is sort of like skill challenges, where it was a new system introduced by an edition, imperfect and rough gem in its form, but the people who could really figure out how to do a lot with it, amazing effects on their games. And I wish we saw it more in adventures. You do see it in Saltmarsh, you see it in a couple other places, but I wish we saw it more. Acquisitions Incorporated, of course, we really, like, every chapter of the adventure has a downtime section. But it is a rough gem there that I hope can become more standard, and maybe the new DMG will help do that. We'll see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's talk about what the point of downtime activities are according to the Dungeon Master's Guide. It says the campaign benefits when characters have time between adventures to engage in other activities. Allowing days, weeks, or months to pass between adventures stretches the campaign over a longer period of time and helps to manage the character's level progression, preventing them from gaining too much power too quickly. And I thought that was an interesting point, because I don't want to say a majority, but for a lot of players, that gaining of power is the point of the game, even more than any stories that come out of it. And I don't, that's not a judgment statement. That is just the way it is. We saw that in third edition, right? Living Greyhawk. It was just a race to get the next level and the next power and the next thing, until people realize that the prize they win for being the highest level character, the first character to level 20, is that you have nothing else to play. And still, it's that one segment of the player population, which I love, is get me to the next level. I want to do the next thing. I want to show my build. And this is saying, in a way that really hasn't come out and said it before, that maybe it's better to go slower. Maybe it's better to have story happening between those times when you are leveling up your character.
So I
And
thought
I
that, yeah.
enjoy that. And I think DMs and players need to hear that that could be a thing.
Yeah, and that is super interesting. I also think it's interesting that this doesn't include a lot of the things that I would say are the huge benefits of downtime for me. So to me, when I think of downtime and why I love it, it's because it allows me to it allows the players to express themselves and interact with the game in ways they can't otherwise do so, right? Otherwise do. Um, Downtime is like a method by which the players can reach out into that campaign and exert their influence in a totally unique and different way, right? They can uncover secrets, they can gain the benefit of factions, they can train a companion they found, they can just, you name it, they can do so many things, right? We're going to do a heist, so I'm going to do downtime to figure out, how to put a plant in the place, right? Like any of these kinds of things, like downtime just has so much reach. I want to build up a place and own it in Chult. I want to, uh, have a crew of pirates that go around and create loot for me. Like there are just so many things you can do, and downtime can become the vehicle for that. And I think this is another case where the DMG didn't exactly know what it's creating at this stage. In fact, the section
Mhm.
before this is recurring expenses, and it just sort of lists like the cost of living if you're doing various activities or own businesses and so on. And downtime seems to just kind of transition after that because they're saying, well, maybe you have these other things that you're involved in, and so we're kind of
Mhm.
rolling and figuring those out and then getting back to the adventure. But to me, the true benefit of downtime is when you as a DM can see how to integrate this in regular intervals into a campaign to give your players far greater reach and influence over the game that they're in.
And you can see this evolution of what downtime is or could be by how it is expressed throughout the books. At first, in the player's handbook, when it talks about downtime, it says, here are some things your characters might do. Crafting. And it's not even magic items, it's creating
Hmm.
creating goods. And it's cool, but it's not really heavily story related. It's not looking forward so much
Yeah.
as just, okay, I can do this thing. Practicing a profession. It's a way to say, cut scene. Oh, I'm a baker, I'm baking. I put my sword down and I'm baking. And it's sort of like I said, bookkeeping, recuperating.
Hmm.
If you have a long-term disease, how do you get rid of it? Researching. And here we get the first hint of maybe thinking ahead a little bit
Hmm. Hmm.
and training. It's you want to go up a level? Well, you might have to pay some money and spend some time to do that. So it's really still more character focused and more bookkeeping than it is story. But then we get in the Dungeon Master's Guide a little bit more heft and a little bit more direction. Not a lot,
Hmm.
but a little bit more. Uh, do you agree?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think
Okay.
and in fact, if we look at how each of these activities we're going to talk about is built, one of the things that's really indicative to me is they are built differently with different implications for the game, different spans of time. It's as if when they were creating downtime at this point in time, they just thought, well, let's have a rule for X and let's have a rule for Y. But they didn't think of downtime as an entity. Xanathar's
Mhm.
builds closer to that. It doesn't fully create a pattern, but there are enough that you can see, hey, you know what? There are a number of cases here where now I can really see how I will role play around this. Now I can really see a common like 3-act structure to the downtime, right? Sort of 3 checks, 3 things that are
Right.
happening as I try to do this activity. And you can come up with a sort of more of a formula by which you could apply it to the campaign and the pace of a game.
I first used downtime extensively when running the Acquisitions Incorporated adventure. And I started by doing it one of two ways. I would either create a pick list for the players saying, here are some things that you can do, named things you choose. Then as they got more used to it, I just asked the characters, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
And then I would find the category that fit best. Or if not, I would create my own category and do it that way. But everything between the DMG, the Player's Handbook, Xanathar's, and the Acquisitions Incorporated book, pretty much everything they wanted to do was in there in some way.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that.
I thought spoke well. Yeah.
So I used Downtime. Well, my first exposure to Downtime was really through Adventurers League, which had in its core rules from the very beginning, day one of 5e, it had uses for downtime. So things like you can learn a skill, right, which is one of the available options, but they would just translate it to spend X points of downtime that you've earned, and now you just have that skill, or spend downtime to go up a level because you want to play with your buddies at a higher level. And so we can just assume that time has passed. So it was all very mechanical, right? And it was really when I started to run adventures, and then later when I was thinking about the construction of Acquisitions Incorporated, where it was like, well, what is it that these rules are really trying to do? And what is it that Xanathar's advances? And then I agree with you. It becomes a really nice interplay where you get to say to the players, ideally with prompts from the campaign, what do you guys want to do, right? So in the Acquisitions Incorporated adventure, like one of the one that I remember that was really nice was, they had rescued a creature that was a kind of, magical creature. And they had also rescued a small humanoid that was potentially an NPC. And so I said, hey, you've got these two entities. You've got these questions that I've heard you say about what's happening in the campaign. You may have personal goals. Let's go around and you all tell me what you want to do. And so they all kind of agreed on what each of them was doing, right? So one of them, for example, wanted to train this magical animal and help it find a home. Another one wanted to train the companion that they had just kind of learned, this humanoid. Someone else wanted to research what's going on, and so on and so forth, right? Then I also, because it was part of the franchise rules, I said, well, you've got this business you're all trying to run. Who wants to spend their downtime helping that business, and what are you doing about it? And the result is a really rich integration between the players and the campaign world in great ways, right? And this was a middle school group, so one of the guys would do things like, I want to research types of cheese, but you know how happy that player is that they get to do this in the game, right? It's not just we end a dungeon, we go to the next dungeon. They get to, and they went to a cheese fair and they met one of the Acquisitions Incorporated guys who turns out to be really into cheese. And boy, that player could not have been happier. Did they accomplish anything of substance for their character? Yes, not for the campaign, but boy, they love it. And everybody had a good laugh.
Right.
We all had a blast, right? It was great.
Yeah. And what's magical about that is, like any sort of creative endeavor, when you get a focus, you find ways to use that focus in the art that you're creating. And it's the same thing with this. As soon as cheese becomes an important part of this character, cheese can now appear in a lot of different places, even though it's not in the adventure itself. But if not just the DM, but if the players are on task, then cheese becomes an integral part of not just that character story, but the entire campaign.
Absolutely. Cheese.
It's not difficult to make that happen. Yep. The same humanoid that your players rescued was rescued by my players, and he no one was able to train him. They tried but failed during one downtime, so it was considered that he maybe needed training in something else. So he was sent to Phoenix University of Waterdeep, where he engaged in a different kind of training that the characters and the business paid for, and ended up paying great dividends in the end.
That's awesome.
So, right, all of these things are there for your characters to integrate more with the story and the world that you're creating. And it's all through this mechanism of downtime, which can be used in a variety of ways.
Yeah, and before we go into the specifics, I just want to say I know that this is hugely popular with DMs because the I wrote a series of blog articles about downtime, and those are some of the more popular articles that on my blog. So I know there are a lot of DMs out there who are seeking the guidance of how to use this, want a consolidated list of all the activities, want ideas for how to approach them in a cohesive manner. So I know it's an important topic and one that's caught on, right? DMs see this in the DMG and go, "Hey,
Yeah.
I want to do more with this."
And mostly I think because it is another outlet for creativity, but it's a very important way for game masters to be able to draw players into the story who might not otherwise want to
Yeah,
engage as much with the story and the world. Because if they want a +2 flame tongue to fight a white dragon, and you don't just hand it to them, but you actually make them use downtime to
yeah,
find it, to bargain for it, to maybe go on a side quest in order to convince the owner of it to give it to them or sell it to them.
yeah.
That player is who would normally be just like, no, just give me my weapon, is now very focused on this part of the story.
Yeah, and another place where this has come up a lot is DMs will run Dragon Heist, and for
Mhm.
the troll skull portion, this will come up because it's in the adventure, but then it sort of disappears. And I think what a lot of DMs realize is, wait a minute, that kind of concept was really cool. Why were I leaving this behind? I want to keep this going, right? And I want to keep. And the players are saying like, well, I want to keep developing this tavern that I inherited, right, or that I received. I want to keep. I don't want this to just be a chapter in the book and we forget about it for the rest of the game, right? And I think that's
Yeah,
something that's neat when players want to do that.
yeah, yeah. It in the Acquisition Incorporated campaign I ran, we would play a chapter of the adventure, and they would level, they would get downtime, and then we would spend 2 or 3 sessions, not just a single session of roll the die. Okay, you gain 20 gold, you lose 20 gold. This was, what is everyone doing? The rolls would trigger positive or negative things. Oh, you want to open one of the mines that's been closed. Okay, great. Give me some rolls. You're going to hire someone to go in and make sure it hasn't been tapped out yet. Well, the best assayer in the land is in this town over here. Okay, you go find. Well,
Hmm.
he is in trouble with the local law. And so you need to deal with that. The local sheriff is a bad dude, and he's blackmailing this assayer to work for him. So you need to deal. And we would have almost, I would say, more adventures doing downtime, actual
Uh-huh.
role playing, dice combat, than actual playing of the published adventure uh at certain points, which was amazing and fun.
That's really cool. Yeah, and that's one of the nice things about downtime too that I think the DMG doesn't even know to address because it's before anybody was using it, is that it really scales well to whatever you want to do with it. Like you can be the kind of DM and the kind of player that says, I want to go into the local cage match and just beat some dudes up for money, and you can do a couple of rolls and hey, here's the money you earned or lost based on this activity. Or you could say, great, you first you have to talk your way into the pit match. So
Mhm.
let's talk about how you do that, and let's set up the scene, and let's talk through it. And now you arrive and you see that there are already some contestants in there, and try to do some talking. You learn, hey, here are the people who place the heavy bets, and here's how this thing works. So if you want to influence, you want to be successful, it's not just about punching in the ring. You've got to manipulate the crowd and the big betters. And so how do you do that? Okay, you've set that up. And now your third thing that you're doing, because I like thinking of these in 3 act structures, which the Xanathars
Mhm.
often uses.
Yep.
Now you're actually in the cage match facing the competition. And maybe it's just one big fight, or maybe it's several, and we build it up. And that can be a really short activity if we go through it fairly quickly, or as you said, it could be, a decently long time that we are interacting with this and playing it out to some extent. But at the end of it, it can be really satisfying, right? We could have in just a cage match kind of scene, uh, very quickly executed, or we could be the type of situation where now this person has met the movers and shakers of the underworld, the noble that comes to the pit fight every week to place bets because they love to, come down and mix it up with the common folk and the seedy side of town, right? Just a lot of stuff can happen, and we can use that in just infinite ways in our game. So I love what downtime can be. I'm so glad it's in this book. I wish it were updated, and I'll be curious to see how they update this, whether they can make it speak to all those things, right?
Exactly. So let's talk about what the DMG says about downtime. I've given you the overall thing. What are some things that you can do? What are some downtime activities? The first is building a stronghold, where we get a chart that gives us construction time and construction costs, which is good information. The next step is, what do you do with this stronghold? Is it even worth building a stronghold if it's not going to be attacked by a villain riding a dragon at some point later?
Mhm.
I don't think so. But yeah, it's fun to have a stronghold. What benefits does it give a group? What drawbacks, other than having the upkeep of it, are there? Right?
Yeah.
Those sorts of things are the meat of what downtime can be. So the skeletons here, we just need to put the meat on it.
Yeah.
You want to take the next one?
Well, yeah, and I'll add that this is why we created the franchise system for Acquisitions Incorporated is to look at a building as much more than this stronghold you're going to set over on a hill and then be just in dungeons, right? Like whether it's a organization, it's a business, it's a castle, like you can use that franchise system to do a lot more than this building a stronghold role. The next one is carousing, and this is one that's actually pretty good, and I think really it gets revised later, but it gets into that kind of concept of what we want out of downtime a little more commonly. So carousing is the idea that you're going to go out and meet people and influence and so on. Um, and so you have things like the results on this table can be you earn modest winnings from gambling and recuperate your lifestyle expenses, or you're caught up in a whirlwind romance and roll to see what happens from that. It's a little haphazard in how it's set up, but there's some neat concepts here of what might happen that I think really speak to
Yeah.
those possibilities of the activity. You make an enemy.
Yeah, in 2012, when the game Dungeon World was created, one of their moves is carouse.
Mm,
And in it, you make the roll like you always do in these 2d6. You roll a 2d6, and 10 plus, you get to choose 3 of these benefits. 7 to 9, you get to choose one. If on a miss, you still get to choose one, but quote, things get really out of hand, and the GM will say how. And I thought, okay, there's an indie game, right? There's an indie game doing this. 2 years later, the DMG comes out with their carousing downtime, which you read a couple things, but here's one of them you might roll. You make an enemy. This
mm,
person, business, or organization is now hostile to you. The DM determines the offended party, and you decide how you offended them. And so this is like indie game here, right? We're into this indie
yeah.
storytelling sort of thing where you fail. Here's the consequence. You get to tell a little bit of the story. The DM gets to tell a little bit of the story. And that's from the Dungeon Master's Guide. And I that's where we can move with D&D if we are very good designers and teach the game masters and the players how to use these to tell great stories. Next, we have crafting magic items. It's pretty much like it says. You get to decide what item you want. You have a certain budget that you have to spend. If it's an item that can cast spells, you need to be able to have a spell slot, and that spell to cast or get help in making it. And then after a certain amount of time, based on the rarity of the item and the gold piece value that's associated with that, you can spend that many downtime days to do it.
And I think they try to
I
help
love this
out.
when it's done well.
Just to say that they try to help out the DM by saying, "Hey, you might need special ingredients," and then those become adventures to reclaim them, right? And so they try to give a little bit of like, in case your players are reading this book and say, "Hey, I want to craft this thing," you could say, "Well, sure, but now you need the feather of the phoenix and the whatever," and
Yep.
okay, a little more work to get them to earn it. In which case, they're going through activities that might have granted them that kind of item to begin with, so it's all fair.
Yep. Right. And what the DMG needs to tell game masters here is be very wary of giving players exactly the magic item they want, or worse yet, creating their own magic item that's not in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Because down that path lies madness and or broken character power. So always be wary and understand the consequences of giving the exact right magic item to the exact right character.
Yeah.
And as much as you can, to the extent that the players and yourself want to, tie everything to a story. Make them get the formula for building this axe of power and have special ingredients that they need to find, and tie it into the story that the rest of the campaign is telling. Use the idea that you have story beats. And so one beat could be doing the goody goody thing, but you need to get a little dark if you want to get the ingredients for this item, or vice versa, right? Maybe your characters are all dark, but the only way to get this item
Mm.
is to work for the Church of Virtue. And they're the ones that have the formulas for the magic items in their vault. So you need to do those things in order to get these items. Anything else on that? Or are you ready to move on to the next one?
Yeah, the next one is gaining renown, and this we don't have to go into great detail because it really uses the renown rules from Chapter 1, which don't come up that often. But if you want to, it's a good example of if you want to have a specific type of campaign, downtime is a great way to enable that by saying, "Hey, go off and spend your downtime time gaining the renown with this organization, and you can have now higher renown with them." And that's great, right? So if you want to get in with the nobles, here's your mechanic for one way you can do it is by gaining renown with the nobility, right?
Mhm. And you can tie these together.
Oh
The
yeah.
the f- the organization that you are trying to gain renown in holds the key to the magic item formulas. So you need to have more renown in order to get that, and you have to do certain things in order to gain that renown. So you could play around with this in so many different ways. Next is performing sacred rites. So if you spend at least 10 downtime days performing sacred rites, marriages, baptisms, sacred rites, as it says, you can gain inspiration at the start of each day for the next 2d6 days. Sure, why not?
Yeah.
It's a mechanical thing that some people may
Mhm.
be happy with. You could use that for anything. You could use that gain inspiration for 2d6 days for running a business, for sowing rumors, for doing
Right.
anything. But it's a tool there at your disposal.
The next one's running a
You want
business,
to do
and
running a business?
yeah, this is one that I kind of got to redo somewhat for the Acquisitions
Mhm.
Incorporated, where we have a running a franchise activity that tries to make it a little more dynamic. But it's a neat concept because what it's saying is if you've got something that you own and you want to see how it does against its costs, and that could be your castle or whatever, you've got something that's a gold drain, then that you may want to make up for that gold drain. So here's the way that you do that. And so What was nice about this is, as I said in that example before of the Acquisitions Incorporated campaign, it could be like, hey, we all have these various goals, but someone's got to take care of the fact that we've got this business we're running, this organization we're running. And because you're going to roll and you may suffer a big loss or you may gain, but if you are active in it, then you can boost your chances. And that's where I think it particularly gets interesting, instead of just rolling, that you are able to help it a bit. But yeah, so the core rule here is you roll percentile dice and add the number of days that you spent on the activity, and that boosts your chance of getting the high results that can get you a profit. And that's the core concept. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I think it's pretty solid for being as simple as it is.
Mm-hmm.
Next, we have selling magic items. So, like these other things, there are a few charts where you can figure out how long it would take you to find a buyer, depending on the rarity, and then how much you can get based on that rarity, and a die roll to see if you can buy it or you can find a buyer, either a regular buyer or a shady buyer.
Yeah.
And if the buyer is shady, it's up to you whether the sale creates legal complications for the party later, right? I love that. Let's take that one more step, right?
Yeah.
Just give me 2 examples for me, because I'm a new DM, I'm a new storyteller. I need to know what those legal complications might be. But that's where we want to move. That's where we want to get a little more story and creativity, supporting creativity in these rules.
Yeah.
Yep. Next. Oh, sorry. Anything else on selling
that's
items?
great. I was just going to say, Sowing Rumors kind of tries to do that too, where it is the idea of swaying the public opinion over somebody and changing the attitudes of sort of a populace, which is a really neat concept to have in these rules, which I think.
Yep. Oh yeah, for sure. When we ran the Ac Inc. Campaign, one thing you can do is become the mayor. And so I said at one point, okay, we just finished a short adventure. You have some downtime. What do you want to do? What this character is running for mayor, remember? And someone went, I want to make rumors about the other candidates. And I'm like, well, there just happens to be a specific downtime exactly for this, Sowing Rumors. And it was perfect. And they did the thing. They did well, but there were complications that ended up leading to a whole other adventure. So yeah, it's great stuff.
Absolutely.
What else we have? What other downtime?
So the last one is training to gain levels. Depending on how you look at it, this is just kind of a tip of the hat to old school ways of playing, where sometimes it would say, and some DMs would use these rules where you had to train before you could gain your level. You could even look at the concept of where, like, the druid would have to defeat the other druid, or the monk would have to defeat the other monk. When you got to high levels, it's sort of this kind of concept of earning your levels. You spend time and money to pull it off, and it's fine. I think what's more interesting is to try to get beyond just this mechanics to what it signifies, right?
Yep. Yeah, it signifies the character's place in the world and the story that's taking place in that world. And if you can there can only be one monk of levels, 12 to 20. Not only is it important for that monk character, it can become important for all of the other characters to help that monk character along the way. While they might not be able to actually fight the hand-to-hand combat that must take place, they can certainly do things to get the character in a position to succeed. And that can become an important part, like I've said over and over again, I feel like, not only of the individual stories, but of the overall campaign, because maybe the villains are trying to stop the monk from gaining that level,
Right.
from becoming that person. So it now we've got a whole maelstrom of story and plot and training and leveling happening, uh, all at once.
Yeah, it can be a lot of fun. And yeah, the next section here says creating downtime activities, and it's interesting because I don't know that it's sort of loose guidelines, and
Mhm.
so it's important to note, or in case our listeners don't know, that most of the activities that we've covered are obsolete now because Xanathars came up with better ones found in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, Chapter 2. Then you have the ones in Acquisitions Incorporated, Chapter 2, which also greatly expand the list of what you can do. Between Xanathars and Acq Inc., you're in really good shape. I should also note every activity in the player's handbook has been replaced by a new version. So you can almost just ignore those and let your players know that. Um,
Right.
but I've got the following suggestion on how you run downtime and sort of improvise it. And I've got blogs on this and a downloadable file too that groups everything together. Um, so the first thing is that in your campaign pacing, you want to have clear breaks, and ideally with prompts. So we finish an activity like wilderness exploration. They finish the dungeon. They stop the cult that's underneath the bowels of the sewers, whatever. Um, so now there should be natural questions that players will have as part of this, right? Okay, we got to this new town, but the wilderness beyond is unknown. We have these issues we're grappling with. What was the cult trying to achieve? Those kinds of things. And you can specifically prompt your players for downtime now that there is this break in the action and provide them with some ideas of things they can do so they're not sitting there floundering, but also they may have other goals they have, and you can prompt them also based on the things you know about them. Like if they have this backstory, right? I don't know what happened to my brother, whatever is going on that they've written up. This is also a perfect time to pull those in. And then, and of course, if they have a business or organization they run, then there's gonna be that baseline. So you ask that players what they're all gonna do. Choose one of the listed downtime activities or design your own. And in general, for creating a downtime activity, what I think of is it's going to involve a number of days. It's going to have a cost in gold. And because it's good to use player gold, they're always looking for ways to use up the character gold. And usually you're going to have 1 to 3 D20 checks to resolve the activity, probably skills. It is expected that at least 8 hours are going to be spent on the activity for the day to count, but you don't have to make those days consecutive. And then one by one, you're going around and having those players spend gold, make the checks, and you're creating that narrative with them to the extent that they and you want to be a part of that, right? That you enjoy this kind of more indie-ish story playing, as we were saying. Then you can really have that, set the scene, involve it. Maybe one person you might have several people working together on activity, and you can have that kind of interplay. And then in general, based on that result, you are adjudicating the level to which they are able to attain those things. And often what I do when I have a sort of 3 check set up, then I'm using those story arcs like I talked about before, right? Like the approaching the pit fighting, assessing the competition, and then the fight, right? That creates a nice narrative out of it, and those 3 checks allow you to adjudicate the success of it overall. And you can use anything in Xanathars as a sort of guideline of what does it mean to have good success and outcomes versus mediocre ones or failure. And then you have that piece. And then the last part is something that Xanathars introduces around rivals. And so there is this
Mhm.
possibility that a complication arises and maybe a rival is involved. So you sell the magic item, but in fact someone else wants it. Or you buy a magic item, but you realize that actually it was stolen, right? Or you may not even realize it, but it was stolen, and that's the complication. So these kinds of bits, having a way that you can introduce those in there that don't feel like gotchas, but feel like rich story, makes downtime even bigger and more interesting to everybody involved. Yeah.
Yeah. And weaving all of those disparate threads together, tighter and tighter and tighter as the story progresses, makes the world and the story all seem like one coherent thread rather than all of these disparate threads with 6 different disparate characters doing their own thing. They can do their own thing, but as you figure out who the villains are and as you figure out who the important NPCs are, those threads are going to start connecting, and it will be a much richer campaign for it, as the chapter told us at the beginning.
Yep.
So, anything else, Teos, with this, or are we ready to shut down?
Well, we have one question that came in, a listener question from Man and Martin that we can hit very quickly. And basically, what they're saying is they're running Last Mines of Foundelver, and they had their artificers say, "Hey, I'd like to do some crafting," which awesome. And the DM totally wanted to do this, but the adventure had them all on the clock trying to find an NPC friend of the party that was kidnapped. And so they're like, well, what do we do? Because there could be all this downtime, but there's no time for it. What do you do? Um, and, should I just accept the lack of downtime or should I change the adventure? And I think that this was something that we tried to do with Acquisitions Incorporated, which specifically says that your franchise, your organization or business that you're a part of or own, has employees and lets you direct people to do things for you. And I think that's an amazing piece of what downtime can do is and a campaign can do is you've got these allies that someone else can take the downtime for you and carry out these pieces.
Mhm.
And so if possible in a long running campaign, I love to use the franchise rules to create an organization that they're a part of. You can also use the patron system that appears in Tasha's and Ebron to then allow you to use these employees of yours, and they're making the checks and seeing whether you can do this, so that you can still be running after the bad guy or doing whatever else is doing, but that can happen. What do you think, Shawn?
Oh, that's a great point. It gives you so much flexibility to tell different stories at the same time. You can take the focus and take the camera and move it over to
Mm-hmm.
the household staff who has been tasked to go out and do these things, and let the players still roll the dice. Let the players role play their employees and get them into trouble and get them out of
Yeah.
trouble. And sometimes the players will have to save their employees. Sometimes the employees might save the character's bacon, not necessarily in a battle sort of way, but through a good die roll or a fortuitous circumstance where otherwise the players might not have gotten a piece of information that proves vital. Good. Okay, so you can focus that lens in the place that is most interesting at the moment to get the story across that you're trying to get across. So I love that.
Me too. Love it.
It got so much, the players got so invested in their retainers that the next campaign was they played the retainers, and
I did
that's the
that
sort
too.
of thing that you want to happen. Instant investment, instant backstories for each of those characters already tied together. So much good role-playing stuff can move from there. So
Perfect.
highly enjoyable and very much recommended. Speaking of highly enjoyable and very much recommended, thank you out there to all of our listeners for putting up with our ramblings. We do so much appreciate your support, whether that support is moral or financial. And for our financial supporters, those who back our Patreon, we thank you. We thank our Master of Dungeon supporters. We give a special shout out to our Master of Realms supporters in our show notes, and to our Masters of the Multiverse patrons. This shout out is for you. Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing, Craig Bailey, Steve Bissonette, Merrick Blackman, Evil John, DM Chad, Darren Chandler, Seth Eckel, Andy Edmonds at Nerdronomicon, The Mighty Jerd, Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman, Sean Hurst, Brian King, Jim Klingler at AKA DM Prime Mover, Chad Lynch, The Mathemagician, Eric Mengi, The Micro Ant, Sean Malley, Falcon Neal, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Ross Sandberg, Andy Shockney, Krishna Simone Say, Joe Tyler, James Walton, and Graham Ward. Thank you. If you would like to become a patron like those wonderful people, you can go to patreon.com/masteringdnd. You can also leave a review via Apple Podcast, or you can subscribe to us via YouTube. Where can people find all of your excellent information, including stuff about downtime?
alphastream.org is your place. And I haven't opened the Twitter app since it became a giant X. So look for me on Mastodon. I'm not really liking Blue Sky, but I am on there. And in fact, Mastering Dungeons is even on Blue Sky technically, but we're more just sending things out. Shawn, where do we find you?
All the places. Just go at Shawn Merwin, Mastodon, X, Twitter, Blue Sky now, Facebook, LinkedIn. I will answer questions anywhere. And you can always go to the Mastering Dungeons YouTube channel and talk to us there. So we got up and we got downtime. What are we going to do now?
I'd like to take the downtime activity of sleep, but unfortunately my day job is calling.
Yep. I'm about to do the downtime activity of practice profession.
Ooh.
So, and hopefully I'll see some folks out there at Gen Con. Stop by and say hi.
Yay, not me.